Okay, so hi, my name is Heyliger. I teach the darkroom classes here at MiraCosta, or at least one of them. I'm a little bit underprepared, but I'm going to sort of show a few different bodies of work from the last few years that all kind of revolve around this central idea or theme. So the thing that's been kind of fueling my artistic interest and curiosity for a decade now is finding these little cracks or fissures in between the way that the camera sees the world and the way the human eye sees the world. So photographic material throughout history has always sort of done its best to recreate or it's like calibrated to human experience, human vision. We want our photograph of our niece's prom date or our nephew's birthday to look exactly the way that we remember it. So photography's linked to memory kind of dictates that the material is calibrated to the way that we see the world. So my interest is in kind of using the rational lens of the camera. The camera just sees whatever is standing in front of it, and using it to create kind of irrational images that still resonate with the human experience. So I'll take these kind of chronologically. If anybody has questions at any point, don't be shy. Okay, so this is a body of work titled Hell Mirage, which I started nearly 10 years ago, I suppose. So my background prior to moving to California was really, like, I consider myself under the umbrella of landscape photography, but I previously worked in a really kind of documentary mode. I was really interested when I lived in Boston, photographing like the infrastructure industry, so canals, railroads, kind of remapping that in a 21st century context. And so when I moved to California, it was this completely different like spatial problem. Like I grew up in Colorado, big open skies, but learned photography, studied photography in Boston, which is very like treed and claustrophobic. So when I moved to California, it was really kind of overwhelming trying to use the camera to navigate that spatial problem. So with this work, what sort of like spurred it for me was this idea that instead of using the landscape as a subject, kind of like beholden to its history and its current context, that I would use the landscape as a studio. So this project isn't site-specific. It's made kind of all over Southern California through the deserts and mountains, but really just kind of looking at the landscape as like a playground for different experiments. So there are a lot of kind of multiple exposures that involve moving the camera. The kind of camera that I use is an old like 19th century kind of bellows camera, so the lens and the film can move independently of each other. So by like stretching those bellows apart during the exposure, we can get this sort of like distortion, almost resulting in this kind of fractal pattern. And then it was also important to me that like the word hallucinatory gets thrown out a lot, and I like understand it. But what's important to me is that there's a sort of like foundation, like a terrestrial foundation. Like we know that these things are of this world, even if they might be like photographed in kind of a spiritual way, almost like a religious icon, with all that negative space around it. So, these photographs that are more straightforward and kind of like specimens or artifacts serve as the foundation for the kind of trickier images that kind of like put cracks in that foundation. So I like having those two things kind of working in opposite directions of each other. I sort of mentioned that question of navigating space or like reconciling it in the camera. So the title for this piece is Northeast Southwest. So this is like one Joshua tree that I found in the middle of the desert, but it's 4 exposures on the same piece of film, so it's photographed looking in the cardinal directions. So I like this idea of, when we think of landscape photography, we think of the camera looking out. I like the idea of the camera looking in on this kind of fixed central point. And I've tried to remake it like a dozen times, and it never works. It's just the first one. This is from kind of a subset of images from that body of work titled Nothing Stands Still. So there's a point in making this series that I was really, when you like hit that slump where things feel formulaic and like you just can't find your mojo. So I was having a conversation with an old professor actually, and they gave me like the best bit of artistic advice that I think I've ever received, which was, what about making so it's like I have this problem in my practice, and he's like, well, what if the work like is about that problem of feeling stale, of feeling like you're making the same image over and over. And that kind of spurred this idea where I would like go somewhere, I would make an exposure on a piece of film, and then kind of like stash it away, and then come back weeks, months, years later, and then try to reorient myself in that spot and make the same photograph again. So that idea of like you can't step through the same river twice, that proposition by Heraclitus, kind of like a photographic rendition of that. So this is up in Death Valley. I don't remember the exact dates. I have them written down somewhere, but this picture was made over the course of like 8 months, I think, 9 months. Really interested in photographing wind and the way that it kind of manifests in the landscape. So this is just multiple exposures onto a piece of film while this creosote was really kind of whipping around, trying to make visible something that's unseeable. So this is an image, this is the image that started, it was a catalyst for the whole series. So for this photograph, all I did was move the film during the exposure, and it created this sort of like trail of the sun. And what excited me so much about it was, well, for one thing, like if we know photography and how photographic material works, when we see the sun kind of stretch like that, we assume that there's like a lot of time that has passed or elapsed over the course of the photograph. But this was like a little lie that I made with my hands in a second or two. So I was really excited about that kind of like distortion of time in a single image. And then I just loved, like it's hard to see here, but that white line is so like wavery from the movement of my hand, and it was so like imperfect and human, that it really fired me up. Like my photography was feeling really kind of like clinical. And like, I had an incredible undergraduate education from a technical standpoint. So I was sort of like persnickety and fussy about things being perfect. So that was sort of me like letting my hair down and going wild. Okay. This is a waterfall. Same deal, like going to the waterfall multiple visits to photograph it. These were, I think I was just trying to come up with a cute date for my now wife, but we would go and like gather tumbleweeds in the desert. And then these are, does anybody know what plastidip is? Just like a rubberized coating that you can use for tools, or people put it on their cars or whatever. So I was making these like rubberized sculptures of tumbleweeds. And then, so this image is caused by an effect called solarization. So this is a photograph of the sun. If photographic material, film in particular, receives like an extraordinary amount of light, like 10,000 times the amount of light it's supposed to, it creates this kind of inversion where positive becomes negative and light becomes dark. So this was like any day that I would go out and I wasn't feeling the pictures, or the day was kind of a bust, I would try to kind of recreate this effect, which you actually see quite a bit in 19th century photography when the material was a little less refined. It's eventually something that was manufactured out of material. There is an Ansel Adams photograph out there somewhere from the 30s with a black sun, but I finally figured that out. And that went on to kind of spur a series a few years later. Okay, so this is a series titled 13 Beats for a reason I might get into or might not later. So this is what I did during COVID, and so in the years between that last photograph and this one, I'd made a few images with the black sun. I'd gotten more kind of like control over making it repeatable. I started kind of like tweaking the chemistry to kind of like coax it out of modern day material. And then eventually I I used to commute from San Diego to Fullerton, and at a certain time of day, the sunlight coming off the water was just like blinding. So I was like, I wonder if that intense reflection can produce that same kind of solarization. So it was a real pain in the butt from a technical standpoint, but I really liked this idea that part of the image was positive, part of it was negative. It's like we're sort of looking at two divergent realities, like the camera's way that it sees the world and the human's way it sees the world at the same time. And this is just an optical phenomenon, a photochemical reaction that kind of speaks to the human experience in the sense of like, when you look at something really bright, you have that after image that kind of like stays with you. I like the idea of kind of packaging that experience for later consumption. And these were also really heavily influenced by 19th century photographer Gustave Gray, who's best known for these seascape images, where at the time, photographic material could not record water and the bright sun at the same time. So what he did to work around that is he would composite two negatives together. He'd photograph the sky, he would photograph the sea, and then he'd like make a dirty trick and kind of like print them both together so that it looked like a single image. And it's great because if you look through, you'll actually see like the same sky in a couple of his photographs. Like he got a little sloppy there towards the end. But so it's like he's using photography to like combine two disparate places or disparate times into a single image. And I liked that idea. I mean, those photographs are absolutely amazing and some of my favorites. But in this way, I also liked sort of seeing those two realities sandwiched in a single image, just in kind of a different way. And this is the first time I ever included people in my photographs. There's something about like the vastness of the ocean and the specificity of like that gap between the way the film sees things and the way that we do that made that seem really important. Last thing I'll do is I'll go through some more recent works. So since that 13B's body of work came out, I've been doing kind of two things. One is going through old negatives that like didn't make sense at the time, and spending time with them, which has been like the most fun ever. And then the other thing I've been doing, we'll get to it here we go, are these images that use the sun to either like redact information or like create a mark on the image in some way. So these are exposures where like the photograph is made and then the camera just kind of tilts its head back. So the sun, which is behind the subject, kind of burns its way across the image, so we get this like crystal clear line. And this is a way of like, I noticed when I was making these, that I would make them at like Zabriskie Point in Death Valley or Devil's Tower, like iconic landscape places that for whatever reason landscape photographers feel obsessed with going to, even though it's been done already. So this was a way to like put a specific timestamp on a photograph and add something gestural to it. And then also, my 208 class this morning, we looked at Thomas Barrow, who was an artist who made this series called Cancellations, where he would etch an X through the negatives, kind of destroying them, which is sort of a reference to the cancellation print in printmaking, where like the addition's done, you scratch it out. So it's almost like these places are canceled, for lack of a better word. And these are what I've been working on lately, these sort of pieces that are multiple prints mounted onto a piece of paper. So I've really been I've been curious about this idea of artificial intelligence and generative AI in particular, and the way that these models are kind of like digesting the internet to create good images. So like that idea of there being like a math equation to make a good photograph is something really interesting. And just thinking about if the AI is constantly feeding on what it's spitting out, that the snake kind of like eats its own tail in some way. So it's this recalibration of like what we value in a photograph in terms of how it looks, in terms of the truthiness or the reality that it has. So I started making these like flawed works that are like specifically human. So this is just obviously 3 photographs of the horizon, and then it's hard to see on the projection, but after the fact I've gone and like measured that angle. So I'm sort of like putting something empirical to an ephemeral gesture that was made in a way that like wasn't measured out. We're sort of doing it after the fact. So this is like a new one with 13 needs. This is all just like a hodgepodge of recent work, so it's kind of just that. I've been doing like more of those horizon studies. So this is, I think, an accumulation of 12 exposures, just tilting the camera, so we have this kind of gradient. It's really sort of soft dissolve. These are paper negatives, so loading a piece of photographic paper into the camera and then moving the camera during the exposure, in this case like rotating it. So what we're seeing is unique, it's a one of a kind in the sense that that piece of paper was actually in the camera when it was made. And we're literally just using the sun as like a point source to make a drawing. I can't draw very well, so I stick to geometric things, circles in this case. You guys get it by now. I'm obsessed with this tree above my studio. Same as this one here. Photographed it a million times. Photographed it yesterday. Photographed it a million more. I have a small series that is like slowly and steadily growing of fields of broken glass in the desert. And like at a certain time of day, right towards the end, when the sun is really low, if you photograph it while the light's like raking across, you get these amazing like constellations of debris and destruction. The projection doesn't do it justice. They're like so beautiful. And someday they're gonna make a great show, but I only have like 4 bangers so far, so we're still working on it. More horizon studies, more black sun. I only have so many tricks up my sleeve, you know, so still kind of working on it. Okay. Oh, and that's we can end here. This was the annular eclipse nearly a year ago. So again, above that tree in the studio. So with these eclipse photographs, I was, I think like half philosophically opposed to like making this huge pilgrimage to photograph something that I knew exactly what it would look like. And the other half of me, I think, was just like jealous of photographers that could like pull up stakes and like go to Texas for a week just to like make a photograph that we all know exactly what it's going to look like. So being a self-absorbed artist, like I am, as some of us are, the idea of like my vantage point, my point of view, seemed kind of more important to me, not to sound too egotistical or anything. So making these images of the celestial phenomena, like where they occur as I see them, and not necessarily like finding the spectacular full event, is me trying to be punk in a roundabout, kind of witchy, boring way. Yeah, that's it, I think. I've probably been going on for too long. Any questions?
Anybody have questions?
Yes.
You mentioned when you had been shooting in the desert and treating the landscape as a studio versus a subject. Would you like add more to that distinction? Like, what might you be thinking, or how might you like look at what you're seeing as like equipment in a studio?
So what I mean by that is, so previously in my career and in like the sort of general genre of landscape photography, we are like going out into nature, into urban places, and just sort of like photographing things as we find them. We're using the camera as this kind of recording device that stands as a surrogate for where we are. And you know, we're retelling a history or creating some kind of story through images that are like more or less using the camera at what it's good at, just like taking a really detailed view of whatever it is that you find interesting or important or significant. And what I mean by using the landscape as a studio was more like kind of freeing myself from that geographic specificity and just like using the landscape as like a playground to do these like weird experiments. Like this is all kind of all my work is kind of like this mixed bag of tricks, but it all kind of revolves around that central idea of kind of like play and gesture and incorporating these human things. Like signs being human, residue that they're making into the thing itself. So like, you know, a photograph like this made in Anza-Borrego. This is not like a documentary photograph of the place. It does a pretty terrible job of describing the place, but as a human experience or something kind of like relatable, it feels familiar. And that's always sort of like the balance for me is like, if it looks too trippy, like this one's on the line for me, I'm still not sure if I like it. But if it's too trippy, it just kind of becomes like boring to me. Like it's important that it, even though it's completely ridiculous and irrational, that it like feels familiar and relatable. So like part of that is maybe influenced by psychedelic use in my younger age, but gosh, that's part of it, I suppose. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm not a photographer, I don't know much about doing this, but you mentioned that you took the picture on the same spot throughout in a few years.
Yes.
Do you like mark the spot exactly to take,
So
how does it work?
it is either that like how some Olympic athletes are just like amazing at sprinting or doing gymnastics. This is either like the thing that I'm really good at, or it's a lot easier than it seems. So like to answer your question more seriously, I think like my problem with that work, I think the actual sentence that I said that spurred that conversation was like, I feel like if I go to the same place 5 times and make the same 5 photographs, just because like the way that I mentally organize a picture and put the frame together, where I stand, where the camera's pointed, where it's focused, etc., was just like pre-programmed, you know, like something that was like no longer exciting to me. So that work is really just kind of about that, like my being formulaic in the way of organizing a photograph. Like everybody, I think regardless of your medium, you sort of like develop and cultivate a style over time. So like in that same way that AI is like analyzing images for like what's good, like my human brain can kind of like look at space and like make the CJ photo that would be different from the photo that you would take or the photo that Ben would take. So it's kind of about just that, like habits, the good things about them and the bad things about them. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
I just was wondering about the technique, like you showed the waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
Do you take the picture of that waterfall throughout in different
days, yeah.
different
So
days,
the
and
camera,
then you put them overlap with each other?
so the camera that I work with, instead of using a roll of film with multiple images on it, it takes one sheet at a time. So what's cool about that is I can go there one day, make a photograph of it, and then put it back in its safe place, put a little post-it note on it with where it was, and then put it back in the bag. And then the next day, I'll go take that same photograph or same piece of film, put it back in the camera, and expose it again. So it's a sort of like accumulation of exposures on a single piece of film over time. And that's really the view camera, the sheet film camera that allows for that.
CJ, can you tell us a little bit more about what is up there right now?
Yes. I was doing this thing for a while. It never really went anywhere except for this, which is actually, that's good for me. Okay, so I was doing this thing where I'd be out in the desert and I would like map out a square meter and I would inventory every rock that was there. Those pictures were extremely boring. But at the end of working on one, I just had this like beautiful little bit, like this accumulation of dust and dirt on the backdrop that I brought with me. So like I was just struck by how beautiful the thing was. I liked the idea the accumulation. I love that idea of like thinking you're doing one thing and then like ending up loving something else completely. And then also, it was an homage to one of my graduate school professors, Philo. How do you spell Philo? Here we go. So James Welling, who was a professor of mine at graduate school, made this series of photographs in the 80s. He was like working as a short order cook, and he was like collecting little bits of like cooked phyllo dough and like sprinkling them on this velvet backdrop and making these photographs. So the title for this one is Accidental Dough. Yeah, Accumulation 1, Accidental Dough. Yeah, so it was made by mistake. Yes?
What are your influences?
My influences are, so let's see, growing up in my 20s when I was like studying photography, I was really obsessed with a movement called New Topographics in landscape photography. So New Topographics was a show at the George Eastman House in the 70s where it was photographs of the human altered landscape. So if we think to like what most of us consider when we think of landscape photography, or up until that show was like what landscape photography was, it's like the glory of nature. And you know, Ansel Adams in some of his photographs would like be standing on the roof of his car on the road, or like literally had his back to Manzanar, like in a Japanese internment camp, while he's making these photographs that appear perfectly natural. So New Topographics was about sort of incorporating human influence on the landscape and not necessarily holding on to that romantic idea of pure nature. So artists like Louis Baltz, Frank Goldke were like big influences of mine. And then like the work that influenced this is this kind of mix of like 70s, kind of like Southern California conceptual photography, so like Robert Cumming, John Davola, and also like 19th century photography. I was actually teaching this class, or 253, the photo appreciation class here, where I was sort of like rereading photo history for the first time in 20 years. And that's where I kind of like rediscovered those Gustave Le Gray images that I fell in love with and got me into like noodling around with the chemistry and things like that. So it's kind of everything, yeah.
You also mentioned someone, it was like a British photographer.
Gustave Le Gray.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Gustavelegray.
Yeah, thank you.
Phenomenal photographs. Better than mine. Any other questions? Cool, thank you guys. So nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Pedro. I'm one of the instructional assistants here. I used to be a student here as well. I took graphic design for media arts and technology and photography here. A lot of these for stuff I made for assignments for the school, so it's kind of like a cool, like, you know, full circle moment. So again, I'm a photographer and graphic designer based in North County, San Diego. I wasn't born here. I was born in the Philippines, and then I grew up in the Central Valley, Central California. So we didn't have the ocean. So when I moved here, I'm like, wow, there's an ocean in front of me, and I can see the horizon, and I can see the sun setting. Like, that's such a big deal for me. So the ocean kind of became my muse when I moved here. So, and I also studied mindfulness, you know, as part of just the practice. So when I see the ocean, or, you know, even just coming out of this classroom, sometimes you can see the ocean. You know, I just stop and take a moment. Like, I'm fortunate to live here. So a lot of it shows up in my work. I like to explore long exposure photography. And I started doing this when I moved to Oceanside. When I lived in Central Valley, like, you could probably photograph traffic with long exposure, and that's about it. Or cows, you know, walking. This would happen actually after the fire. You can see the pier like that. I used to do a lot of long exposure when I first moved here, but then during the pandemic I kind of stopped. And then Jesse over there and his boss at the Outsider magazine said, you need to start shooting again. So I started shooting, and that's when Diane asked me, hey, do you have any work? And I'm like, I do actually.
Actually, when he was in the Outsider show, I went down and looked at all the photographs in there, and I met Aaron because he was one of the people that helped out when Elizabeth couldn't sit all the time, so he became a host for the gallery. And I'm walking through this whole show, and it's a big room up there at Oceanside Museum of Art. And I stopped at this one, which happened to be the beach I went to sometimes when I was younger. But anyway, I thought, I love this one. And I looked down at the name, and it was Aaron. And I go, oh my God, that's Aaron.
Then again, this was after the fire. And actually it was kind of the fire that made me, again, going back to mindfulness, like I need to photograph again because, we almost lost a pier, which is, that's the iconic symbol in Oceanside. And I wanted, my original plan was for the sun to go behind the ruins, but I guess somebody told me, Vlad said that was yesterday. It's not gonna hit it today. I was like,
There's an after that.
yeah. So, but it's still a photo.
Yeah.
This one I did at the harbor. It's 2 different exposures. So I set the stars on infinity, and then this one was, I think, a 30-second exposure for the jetty. And I love this jetty. It's just, I photographed it a lot of times. And then this one is Cassidy Street. I just wanted to capture the traffic, like going back and forth. Again, I studied graphic design here, and I discovered photography by accident. I was more of a Photoshop person, but I also wanted to print my photos. So what would happen is, if I Google images, it would be low resolution. So I started photographing my own thing. So I would composite, I would photograph a cowboy hat, I would put it on my dog or something. And that's how it started. So this one I did for Art 295 here, which is professional practices. And this was a student that I got to know when I was going here. This is probably one of my most personal images. I'm not going to go deep into what it means, but it basically meant when I moved here, like my dad had passed away, and I was going through like a heartbreak. So this kind of embodied my move here. And when I made this, it was I was about to graduate. So it was I went through all that, and I offered all that heartache, and now I get to graduate at school. And so this was my final for this whole school. And so the rock was photographed in Malibu Beach. Again, long exposure. And if you guys recognize the wall, it's just down here. Everybody photographs in that wall, right? Right, Vaughn?
Yeah.
So this is kind of how I started my work. I would think, when I photograph, I think how I'm going to edit it. I don't think about, it has to be perfect on camera. It should be perfect on camera, because it's a lot easier to edit that way. But I also sometimes, when I photograph someone, I photograph from afar, because I can zoom in and play full body. So again, she was a student here. This is another frame of mine for the skirt. And this is the before and after. So I add antiquing to it to kind of emulate film photography. And this was the whole series for that final that I had for Art 295. So it was a lot of work, but this was the first one I did, and it was my favorite. And that image sort of birthed the rest of the images. And again, these are all composites, and I photographed them myself. Like some are from the Philippines, that's Balboa Park. Those were just branches I found outside. That's Carlsbad, the cliff. And this is Coronado. This one I made after I graduated. I made this after the Las Vegas shooting, and I just wanted to be away from humans. So this one was called, it was actually called Island of Me and Aspen, which was my dog who has since passed. And I wanted to just live in an island just with my dog and me, away from humans, because it was just, you know, like the Las Vegas shooting like broke me apart. And that's the before. And again, you'll still see the ocean on my work. And again, the trees from Balboa. The hill is in Fresno, and then the tree is the Mission Church tree, and then that little tower is from Universal Studios, and the Harry Potter land. And then this is more of my composite work. And again, a lot of these were my assignments for the school, because I was so extra. Some of them were for graphic design class.
It's really, the videos are really cool to see your process.
Thank you. Yeah, because some people are like, oh, it's just you took that, you know, and just added a photo. Like, no, like I photographed every single inch of that photo. I added this one. This isn't part of the exhibit. But I added this one because Patty, your instructor, I was telling her my world record is 145 Photoshop layers. And this is 145 Photoshop layers. And this is for Art 244. I think Ben and I took that class. Yeah. And again, this is the old Mission Church tree. And then that's the before. Like even the skulls were mine. Like I photographed the skulls. Obviously, it wasn't real.
You don't have a pile in your basement.
I do have a lot of Halloween tomorrow. I'll give you that. So that's that. Final question. Any questions?
They look good this big.
I know the thing with like digital photography, we don't get to print a lot.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a huge thing, like see it like bigger than instead of like, you know, spending 3 hours, you know, going like that. Yeah, it's really nice.
I think you said a second ago that you photographed every inch of that one photo. Is it important to you to, you know, photograph yourself and then make the composites? Or do you have feelings about like, using other imagery?
So again, I started because I wanted the high resolution, but then it just became an OCD, like, I can't. I have to find a cowboy hat that's pink. You know, I have to find a branch that I photographed. So yes, it was important. And so when the birth of AI came, it was kind of disheartening. Like, man, the things that I would spend 2 weeks on, you could make, you know, you could prompt lady in red dress, you know, facing backward, and it'll make it in 30 seconds. So it was kind of disheartening when AI happened.
Excerpt is unique.
Thank you.
So is there sort of like trial and error going on when you have to look for the like images that you use for the composites? Like is there like a certain time where you put an image in, you try to make it work, and then you just have to remove it and find a different one?
Yes, which makes me sad. I try to kind of envision the image in my head first. And again, that's when my photography degree comes in. I photograph the background footage. And then I want to know where the light's coming from. And again, that's because I took, Part 253 here, I want cinematic lighting. Like you notice, like her dress is illuminated here. I don't think it would be as successful if I just added a flat photo that doesn't have the shadows. So yeah, so I do think about, where I want to place the light, and even the model. I always have an image in my head. It's usually a lady in a red dress. There. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, do you feel like you're inspired by more of the realistic surrealism? And then I was gonna ask, do you prefer how do you, I don't know, I think this is kind of the photography that I think I always enjoyed, because it's it can be real, but it's obviously not.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, I think the word that I am comfortable with is conceptual art. Because I took graphic design here, and I was calling my work fine art. And my professor was like, this isn't fine art. In front of the whole class. So I became comfortable with the word conceptual art. Because you're conceptualizing, that's emotion.
Okay.
Instead of just, I'm going to take a photo of the street. So yes. Good question.
The question I was going to have was, do you kind of build up a backlog of images you could possibly use, or do you only go out, when you have a project, only go out to shoot for
Yeah.
the project?
Like Michael was asking, I have 3 external drives of just stock photos. Before the pandemic, I used to travel a lot. We would go to the Philippines every year. We would go to Italy, just everywhere. So I would photograph old door, like a crazy person. I'd photograph an old door in Mexico. And I'm like, eventually I'll use it. And I did end up using it for the tree photo. And yeah, so I have my own stock images that I photograph. It's not as organized as Getty images. But yeah.
Do you have an organization system for cataloging that sort of thing?
Yes. So I'll do it by months, or raw photos.
Okay.
And
But
so
it's not like trees,
No.
towers,
No.
red dresses.
Eventually, I probably should have, with the keywords on Lightroom. But no.
You just remember when you took things.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big trip. We went to Mexico. That was February. Yeah. Sorry.
So I know you said you lived in Central Valley for a while, and then you came here, and Ocean came to use. Do you think you could go back to Central Valley and kind of use there, or you're just stuck here?
I haven't been back since. I was there for a layover.
Okay.
It was Fresno. I don't know if you guys know where Fresno is.
Yeah.
But if you know where Fresno is, you don't want to go back. Which is funny, when I was because my first semester here was film photography. And everybody during spring break went to Yosemite. And I'm like, bro, there's an ocean outside. And even then, we'll still get Yosemite photos, and I'm like, dude, we have the ocean out there. You can photograph Swami's Beach. So again, it's just different. I think we want what we can. If I went back to Fresno, I would probably just eat because I missed the food. And I photographed. So I don't think I would make conceptual art. It was very hard to make conceptual art there. It was either industrial or farm.
But you are at foothills of the Sierra Nevada right here.
Yes, I did photograph the sequoia. But we have trees. We have Torrey pine. I never want to go.
So what about your specific process? So do you usually take the background photos first, right? You said that, but only the background photos, and then once you pick your background photo, you start taking photos to accumulate to have the bigger picture, or do you also take photos of just random things like that door, and then hope that the lighting will match up?
Yeah, basically stock photo.
Okay.
Because I took graphic design, I can artificially make lighting if I wanted to. I try not to. But yeah, I work on the background first. The reason why, if I photographed her on that rock in just one shot, I would still have to darken her. Or I would have to brighten her up because everything else is dark. Or, you know, or it's long exposure, she'll be too blown out. And then long exposure would be well exposed. So that's why. So it's more of control, lighting control.
Okay.
So if like let's say I wanted a violin here, I'm gonna photograph the violin separately because this is a long exposure, the violin blown out. So yeah, so I do start with the background first, and again, a lot of my models were my fellow students and everybody was busy, so I wanted to make sure the background was done and I didn't waste her time. Like, oh, it was the wrong pose, or, yeah, so yeah.
So, I'm Benjamin Poarch. I'm an instructional assistant here, as well as with Aaron. Been here for quite a while. I think I started here. My first photo class was the beginning digital. It was at 251, which I took online so I could. I was living in my van at the time, so I could drive around and take photos of the coast and surf as much as possible. And that was my intro into photo. I mean, I had a camera, like a trip around the world, got me excited about it, so I decided to take a class. And the next classes after that I took were the analog photography, and that's where I really got into just the physical aspect of making an image with chemicals. I've always been excited by science, and it's still, even if you kind of understand how the process works, it's still like a little bit of magic somehow. So with the silver-based process it's basically capturing a photon that bounces off of whatever subject, and it captures it in a little silver crystal in a way. And then you develop that crystal and it becomes larger, it becomes the image as you see. So this series was kind of thrown together. I didn't really have a whole lot of time. I was out of town whenever the opportunity arose. So this, it's all like chemical tests that I did before shoots. So with the chemical-based processes, you have to know how old your chemistry is, and things change over time. The exposure times get longer as it ages. Everything can seem to work fine one day, and the next day it can be off, and that's usually off your error. And it comes with a lot of troubleshooting. So that's kind of what I like. I'm a little bit masochistic in that way. I guess I like to make more work for myself sometimes, but it's enjoyable when it does work out. So like with any artistic practice, this is more of like a technical practice, I think. I don't know, it's a blend, but you have to know your materials. And this one you really can't, like there's some things you can't really see like on a subatomic level. So you kind of have to figure out what's going on. So I use myself as a subject when I don't have a model around. So I have some of these, and this one in particular, it has some oxidation, and that's what happens. You have to varnish these after you shoot it. So I guess a little bit about the process. So I'm not just rambling. You have to. This is wet plate collodion photography. It was invented in mid 19th century by Frederick Scott Archer, about 1850s. And its heyday was from about 1851 till the 1880s when another process was invented, the dry plate. So with this, there's a time crunch from the start. Like you pour the plate, it's like a syrupy liquid you pour onto the plate, and you have to put it in a silver bath, which is the same thing they use to make mirrors. So that's another process, but you sensitize it, and then you put it in the camera, a large format camera similar to what CJ uses, has bellows. You have to put it in the camera, expose the photo, take it to the darkroom, develop it, and then this all has to be done before the plate dries, because if the plate dries, then it doesn't work. So it's all a time crunch. It's a lot of things to think about all at the same time. And if you do have a model that's sitting for you, hopefully they have some patience, or you're really fast, because people get antsy. I know I do, but the exposures are kind of long, so they're anywhere from like 1 second in the daylight up to 7 or 8 seconds, depending on your chemistry. So there's a lot of testing involved, and I'm just gonna pass around some plates while you guys are listening to me ramble, just so you can feel it. I did some. Don't worry about dropping them or scratching them or anything. These are all just test plates, but some of them I made in the original method where you had to coat your own plate. You had to bake the lacquer on. Some of them are aluminum plates. So those are more of a modern method. They're all shot on like trophy metal. Some of the chemicals can be very dangerous, I guess. One of the fixing solutions to make these images permanent is cyanide, and they can kill. But I don't use that. I use much less toxic solution. So some of these, yeah, I mean, sometimes the chemistry can be all over the place. So this is just an example. I think this is one of the plates that I made myself, black lacquer, and chemistry just like running off. And I've had days where nothing seems to work right. I can't figure it out. I know CJ was here for one day, and I know Aaron was here, I'm pretty sure. And, I was trying to shoot some portraits for people, just doing a demo in class, and it was not working for me. And I didn't know what to do. It's like, it can be so frustrating, as so many other practices can be when things aren't working out. It's just like you have to not really give up. I mean, you're gonna have like, you're gonna fail. But if you try anything that's worth doing, you're gonna fail at some point, and sometimes a lot, but I guess troubleshooting and figuring out like where your problems are, I guess it's like life, I don't know. Just try to figure out what you're doing wrong, and then also what you're doing right. And then, so this is I think this is a decent exposure, so the chemistry is working well. That was a little metal box that I welded, so I'm kind of all over the place and things I like to do. So this is just one aspect of my life, taking photos. But it helps to have other interests as well, because you can get so bogged down in like one thing, you just become myopic at some point, and then, like, you have to, I don't know, branch out so you can get a little fresh perspective on things. So yeah, a lot of these, well, all these are all natural light, so you can do indoor photos with strobes, but I kind of prefer the feel of natural light. It's just that the shadows are not quite as harsh. I don't know, it's more exposure.
They're just
So
moving.
I just moved them around a little bit. So it kind of reminds me of some of the old photos where they take, you know, of dead people. So this is one of the methods they use to like, so that would be like some of the only pictures that people would have of another person is like after they died, you know, so they take a picture of the body. And there are some people that recreated that, you know, just like a dead, like a corpse photo.
Do you know of any archives of the hundred of these plays?
You know, I don't know off the top of my head, but
The Getty have quite a bit.
do they?
Yeah, the
Okay.
research center. The Getty, National Library.
Oh, Library of Congress.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's-
library.
I mean, there are a lot of them, like, still, like, you could probably, maybe even if you're lucky, find one, like, for sale somewhere too, because there are a lot of these plates still floating around. It was an economical way to get your portrait done, because, like, the daguerreotypes that came before, they were a lot more, there's more of a process to it, and they were quite a bit more expensive, so this kind of, like, opened it up to, like, more regular folks getting their portraits taken. A lot of them were a lot smaller. So these are all this size 4x5, but you can do a lot bigger plates if you have the space and the means. So yeah, a lot of these, you know, that's just a testament to experimentation. Sometimes the focus is off. It takes a little bit of doing to get the focus on with one of these cameras. It's hard to get a self-portrait in focus, and there's a lot of stuff to think about. So I'm pretty happy with this one. I think the focus is good, the exposure is pretty good, but it takes a long time to learn. And it's been around for a long time. I'm just, you know, there's some of us keeping it alive.
This is what they used to use to take the old like mug shots.
I don't know. I guess it depends on from the era. Yeah. Yeah. Questions?
So, I noticed, like, with the collodions you made for me and the ones here, the edges aren't, like, defined finely. Is that part of the chemical process of just, like, it not being coated evenly on the plate?
So that's when you pour it on. Sometimes it doesn't hit the edges completely, and that was never really a big deal because a lot of times they'd just be matted and you wouldn't see the edges anyway.
Yeah.
So as long as you don't have too many unacceptable imperfections, like in the face or surrounding area, then the edges don't really matter. But there are artifacts in all these, you know. So some of them you might see like a hair or something that I that I varnished into it, or there's some dust, or there's like little comments from like chemistry and stuff. So I really like that aesthetic, that there's this like element of chance also, and then sometimes they come out really cool with weird funky stuff on them that I don't really know why it happens. So there's still like this bit of like magic.
Yeah, it gives them
You
a
know?
really unique quality.
Yeah.
Even though they're all like a one, it's still like
Do I have anything else?
Ben, how did you get into it? Like, I know you work with somebody to do like commissioned portraits, but did you meet Conrad after you started dabbling or before?
No, it was the first time I tried it was a workshop put on by the photo club here at MiraCosta. So they bought some chemistry and we all got to pour our own plates. They all came out like terrible, but there were images on them, so it was like kind of a success, you know. Anyway. So and then I started working with a gentleman that I met on Instagram. So I was doing other printing methods from the century. So in our art 208 class, that's where we start working with these old methods of printing. So I was doing salt prints, which is another, I think that was like the first photo process. And a gentleman on Instagram was like, hey, want to get together and learn wet plate? So yeah, I went and worked a motorcycle show out in Palm Springs and lighting plates on fire, because you have to, well, not on purpose, but you have like a varnish you put on it to protect the silver image, because it will tarnish if you don't protect it. So we're doing it in the the lobby of this hotel, and you know, I'm first time working with this process really, and so I'm like,
What could go wrong?
he has me varnishing, and I'm like lighting pretty much every other plate on fire and like kind of blowing it out, and trying not to burn the place down, and a bunch of like drunk bikers running around, and yeah, it's a cool experience, but yeah, it's definitely like a niche process. So I end up like working like burlesque shows and like, I don't know, weird events, but yes.
So, since it's like wet and it dries, do you find that, as you're talking about, you never know exactly how it's gonna come out?
Yeah.
Do you think that the environment or atmosphere, like whether it's warm, cool, or you have a lot of humidity each day versus dry, impacts a lot?
If it's dry, you have to work really fast. If it's dry and hot, like the collodion has ether and alcohol in it with salts. So that's the film that you put on, and when you put it in the silver bath, that makes it light sensitive. So if it's hot and dry, that collodion, the ether and alcohol evaporate really fast. So sometimes you really have to work fast. And if it's humid, that's another thing. It can affect the varnish, can get all bubbly and weird. I was working a shoot with the gentleman that I do events with a few weeks ago for a guy's tattoo shop. He had all those people there. You know, it was one of their workers. They're going away party, and plates are just coming out terrible. And it's just like when you're on a job and everything's not working and you don't know why. It's just like one of the most frustrating things that I can imagine to happen. Yeah, so it's really you can't really take it personally, you know, even though it kind of rests on you to figure it out, or you know, whoever you're working with. But just have to accept it at some point, and you know, just like, I don't know, yeah, we got some of them to work out at the very end. So it was hot and humid, so that could have been part of it. They were smoking in the basement, so that could have been, you know, there's so many different factors. I'm still trying to learn what some of them are. But yeah, the heat, the humidity make it really tough. If it's too cold, stuff really won't work either. So it has kind of a sweet spot, but you can manipulate the chemistry to suit the conditions as well. So I think that comes with more experience, more work. Yes?
Is that, I'm so confused, is the thing that you pass around, is that the finished object? Is that the
Yes.
finished photo?
Yes.
Okay.
So they're all reversed. So I don't think I had any print on any of these shirts, but they come out reversed. So you can do these onto a glass plate and make a negative out of it as well. So these are essentially negatives with a dark background. So if they were on glass with no background, it would be, you would just see a negative. And then you put a dark background on it, and it becomes a positive. So that's like another aspect of the magic. To me, anyway.
fun are they?
There are much easier ways. Yeah, film's like quite a bit easier, you know, and it doesn't have that, you know, that pressing time constraint from whenever you load it into the camera. So I kind of like that pressure though. I guess I always have. It makes me, I think, more clear sometimes. So a little chaos, I suppose.
You want to tell them about your workshop today?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're doing a cyanotype workshop. 2 o'clock down in the dark room 2109. Let's forget the number. Anyway, 2100 building, yeah, in the courtyard in between, yeah, just right across the way. So that's another 19th century process, the Herschel that invented that, I don't remember the exact date.
42.
1842? 1842.
I looked it up yesterday.
Thanks, I meant to write that down, but I was gonna put that, I was gonna mention that down there. But anyway, so it was used for like technical drawings and for like botanical like photographs by Anna Atkins, is another as a big early adopters of the cyanotypes for botanical reproduction. So yeah, join us if you'd like. The cyanotype workshop starting at 2 o'clock. It's World Cyanotype Day tomorrow, so that's why we're doing it today. It's kind of a short lead time to invite people, but
And Ben's done all the hard work already, so you
Yeah.
have to make them.
yeah, all you have to do is like put something on a piece of paper that'll block light, and then you'll have a photogram. So I have sensitized some paper ready to go down there.